Pippi Longstocking, Book 2, Chapter 2, Pippi Goes Shopping. One lovely spring day when the sun was shining, the birds were singing, and water was running in all the ditches, Tommy and Annika came skipping over to Pippi's. Tommy had brought along a couple of lumps of sugar for Pippi's horse, and both he and Annika stopped on the porch to pat the horse before they went into the house. Pippi was asleep with her feet on the pillow and her head way under the covers. That was the way she always slept. Annika pinched Pippi's big toe and said, "Wake up!" Mr. Nilsson was already awake and had jumped up and seated himself on the overhead light. Something began to stir under the quilts, and suddenly a red head popped out. Pippi opened her bright eyes and smiled broadly. "Oh, it's you, pinching my toes. I thought it was my father, the Cannibal King, looking to see if I had any corns on my toes." She sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled on her stockings, one brown, one black. "No, sir, you'll never get corns as long as you wear these," she said, and thrust her feet into her large black shoes, which were exactly twice as long as her feet. "Pippi," said Tommy, "what shall we do today? Annika and I don't have any school." "Well, now that's worth thinking about," said Pippi. "We can't dance around the Christmas tree because we threw it out 3 months ago. Otherwise, we could have dashed around on the ice all morning long. Gold digging would be fun, but we can't do that either because we don't know where to dig. Furthermore, most of the gold is in Alaska, where there are so many gold diggers already that there wouldn't be room for us. No, we'll have to think of something else." "Yes, something jolly," said Annika. Pippi braided her hair into 2 tight braids that stuck straight out. She considered. "How would it be if we went into town and did some shopping?" she said at last. "But we haven't any money," said Tommy. "I have," said Pippi, and to prove it, she opened her suitcase, which of course was chock full of gold pieces. She carefully scooped up a good handful and put them in her apron pocket, which was just exactly in the middle of her stomach. "If I only had my hat now, I'd be all ready to start," she said. The hat was nowhere to be seen. Pippi looked first in the wood box, but remarkable as it may seem, the hat wasn't there. Then she looked in the bread crock in the pantry, but there was only a garter, a broken alarm clock, and a little bread. At last, she even looked on the hat shelf, but there was nothing there except a frying pan, a screwdriver, and a piece of cheese. "Well, there's no order here at all. You can't find a single thing," said Pippi disgustedly. "Although, to be sure, I have missed this piece of cheese for a long time. It's lucky it turned up at last." "Hey, hat," she yelled. "Are you going shopping or aren't you? If you don't come out this minute, it'll be too late." No hat came out. "Well, then, it can blame itself if it's so stupid. But when I get home, I don't want to hear any complaining," she said sternly. A few minutes later, they were marching down the road to town, Tommy, Annika, and Pippi, with Mr. Nilsson on her shoulder. The sun was shining so gloriously, the sky was so blue, and the children were so happy. And in the gutter along the roadside, the water flowed merrily by. It was a very deep gutter with a great deal of water in it. "I love gutters," said Pippi, and without giving much thought to the matter, she stepped into the water. It reached way over her knees, and if she skipped along briskly, it splattered Tommy and Annika. "I'm just making believe I'm a boat," she said, plowing through the water. Just as she spoke, she stumbled and went under. "Or, to be more exact, a submarine," she continued calmly when she got her nose in the air again. "Oh, Pippi, you're absolutely soaked," said Annika anxiously. "And what's wrong with that?" said Pippi. "Is there a law against children saying that they should always be dry? I've heard it said that cold showers are very good for the health. It's only in this country that people have got the notion that children shouldn't walk in gutters. In America, the gutters are so full of children that there's no room for the water. They stay there the year round. Of course, in the winter, they freeze in and their heads stick up through the ice. Their mothers have to carry fruit soup and meatballs to them because they can't come home for dinner. But they're sound as nuts. You can be sure of that." The little town looked pleasant and comfortable in the spring sunshine. The narrow cobblestone streets wound in and out every which way among the houses. Almost Every house was surrounded by a little yard in which snowdrops and crocuses were peeping up. And there were a good many shops in the town. And on this lovely spring day, so many people were running in and out that the bells on the shop doors tinkled incessantly. The ladies came with baskets on their arms to buy coffee and sugar and soap and butter, and some of the children were also out to buy candy or chewing gum. Most of them, however, had no money for shopping, and the poor dears had to stand outside the shops and just look in at all the good things in the windows. When the day was at its sunniest and brightest, three little figures appeared on Main Street. They were Tommy and Annika and Pippi, a very wet Pippi, who left a little trickle of water in her path. Aren't we lucky though, said Annika. Look at all the shops, and we have a whole apron pocket full of gold pieces. Tommy was so happy when he thought of this that he gave a high skip. Well, let's get going, said Pippi. First of all, I want to buy myself a piano. But Pippi, said Tommy, you can't play the piano, can you? How can I tell, said Pippi, when I've never tried? I've never had any piano to try on. And this much I can tell you, Tommy, to play the piano without a piano, that takes a powerful lot of practicing. Well, there didn't seem to be any piano store. Instead, the children came to a perfume shop. And in the show window was a large jar of freckle salve. And beside the jar was a sign which read, "Do you suffer from freckles?" What does the sign say? Asked Pippi. She couldn't read very well because she didn't want to go to school as the other children did. It says, "Do you suffer from freckles?" said Annika. "Does it indeed?" said Pippi thoughtfully. Well, a civil question deserves a civil answer. Let's go in. She opened the door and entered the shop, closely followed by Tommy and Annika. An elderly lady stood back of the counter. Pippi went right up to her. "No," she said decidedly. "What is it you want?" asked the lady. "No," said Pippi once more. "I don't understand what you mean," said the lady. "No, I don't suffer from freckles," said Pippi. The lady understood, but she took one look at Pippi and burst out, "Oh, but my dear child, your whole face is covered in freckles." "I know it," said Pippi, "but I don't suffer from them. I love them. Good morning." She turned to leave, but when she got to the door, she looked back and cried, "But if you should happen to get any salve that gives people more freckles, then you can send me over 8 or 9 jars." Next to the perfume store was a shop that sold ladies' clothing. "So far, we haven't done much shopping," said Pippi. "Now we must really get going." And they tramped into the store. First Pippi, then Tommy, then Annika. And the first thing they saw was a very beautiful dummy representing a fashionable lady dressed in a blue satin dress. Pippi went up to the dummy and grasped it cordially by the hand. "How do you do? How do you do?" she said. "You are the lady that owns this store, I presume. So nice to meet you." She continued and shook the dummy's hand even more cordially. I've got a picture of the stores. Can you see this? There's a toy shop, candy shop. I see Pippi, Tommy, and Annika walking along there in front of the drugstore and the grocery store. Pippi continued and shook the dummy's hand even more cordially. But then a dreadful accident happened. The dummy's arm came off and slid out of its satin sleeve, and there stood Pippi with a long white arm in her hand. Tommy gasped with terror, and Annika was beginning to cry when a clerk came rushing up to Pippi and began to scold her most dreadfully. "Here, here, hold your horses," said Pippi after she'd been listening a few minutes. "I thought this was a self-service store, and I was planning to buy this arm." Then the clerk was even angrier than ever and said the dummy was not for sale, and in any case, one couldn't sell just a single arm. But Pippi would certainly have to pay for the whole dummy because she had spoiled it. "Well, that's very strange, said Pippi. It's a good thing they aren't so foolish as all that in every store. Just imagine if next time I'm going to have mashed turnip for dinner, I go to the butcher and buy a shin bone to cook the turnip with, and he makes me take the whole pig. While she was speaking, she casually pulled a few gold pieces from her apron pocket, and she threw them down on the counter. The clerk was struck dumb with amazement. Does the lady cost more than that? Asked Pippi. No, certainly not. It doesn't cost nearly that much, said the clerk and bowed politely. Well, keep the change and buy something for your children, said Pippi, and started toward the door. The clerk ran after her, bowing continually, and asked her where she should send the dummy. I just want this arm, and I'll take it with me, said Pippi. The rest you can portion out among the poor. Good day. But what are you going to use the arm for? Asked Tommy when they had come out onto the street. That, said Pippi. What am I going to use it for? Don't people have like false teeth and false hair, maybe, and even false noses sometimes? Why can't I have a little false arm? For that matter, let me tell you that it's very handy to have 3 arms. I remember that once when Papa and I were sailing around the world, we came to a city where all the people had 3 arms. Wasn't that smart? Imagine when they were sitting at the table and had a fork in one hand and a knife in the other and suddenly needed to scratch their ears. Well, then it wasn't so foolish to pull out a 3rd arm. They saved a lot of time that way, let me tell you. Pippi looked thoughtful. Oh dear, now I'm lying again, she said. It's funny, but every now and then so many lies come bubbling up inside me that I just can't help it. To tell the truth, they didn't have 3 arms at all in that city. They only had 2. She was silent for a minute, thinking. For that matter, a whole lot of them only had 1 arm. Well, if the truth were known, there were even some who didn't have any. And when they were going to eat, they had to lie right down on their plates and laugh. Scratch themselves on the ear, that they couldn't do at all. They had to ask their mothers to. That's the way it really was. Pippi shook her head sadly. The fact is, I've never seen a place where they had so few arms as they did in that city. But that's just like me, always trying to make myself important and wonderful and pretend that people have more arms than they have. Pippi walked with her false arm slung jauntily over one shoulder. She stopped in front of the candy shop. A whole row of children was standing there, gazing in at the wonderful things in the window. There were large jars full of red and blue and green candies, long rows of cakes of chocolate, mounds of chewing gum, and the most tempting lollipops. Yes, it was no wonder that the little children who stood there looking in the window now and then gave a deep sigh, for they had no money, not even the tiniest penny. Pippi, are we going into that store? Asked Tommy eagerly, tugging at Pippi's dress. That store we are going into, said Pippi, far in, and in they went. Please, may I have 36 pounds of candy, said Pippi, waving a gold piece. The clerk in the store merely stared, open-mouthed. She wasn't used to anyone buying so much candy at once. You mean you want 36 candies? She asked. I mean that I want 36 pounds of candy, said Pippi, and put the gold piece on the counter. And then the clerk had to hurry and measure out candy in big bags. Tommy and Annika pointed out the kinds that were best. There were some red candies that were wonderful. When you had sucked them for a while, you came suddenly to a wonderful creamy center. And then there were some sour green ones that weren't so bad either. Jellied raspberries and licorice boats were good too. We'll take 6 pounds of each, suggested Annika, and that's what they did. Well, then if I could have 60 lollipops and 72 packages of caramels, I don't think I'll need any more today, except for 103 chocolate cigarettes, said Pippi. There really ought to be a little cart somewhere in which I could put all this. The clerk told Pippi that she could no doubt buy a cart in the store next door. Meanwhile, a large crowd of children had gathered outside the candy store. They stood looking in the window and nearly fainted with excitement when they saw the scale on which Pippi did her shopping. Pippi ran into the toy shop next door, bought a cart, and loaded all her bags onto it. She looked around. Then she cried, If there are any children here who don't eat candy, will they kindly step forward? Nobody stepped forward. Very strange, said Pippi. Well then, Is there any child here who does eat candy? 23 children stepped forward, and among them were, of course, Tommy and Annika. Tommy, open the bag, said Pippi. Tommy did. And then began a candy-eating party, the likes of which had never been seen in that little town. Jessie?
That's a lot of candy. It's a lot of candy.
All the children stuffed their mouths full of candies. The red ones with the delicious creamy centers, the sour green ones, the licorice boats, the jellied raspberries, and a chocolate cigarette you could always keep in the corner of your mouth because the chocolate flavor and the jellied raspberry flavor were terrifically good together. From all directions, children came running, and Pippi dealt out candy by the handful. I think I'll have to go and buy 36 more pounds, she said, or we shan't have any left for tomorrow. She bought 36 pounds more, and there wasn't much left for tomorrow anyway. Now we'll go to the next store, said Pippi, and stepped into the toy shop. All the children followed her. In the toy shop were all sorts of delightful things. Railroad trains and automobiles you could wind up, sweet little dolls and pretty dresses, dolls' dinner sets, cat pistols and tin soldiers, and dogs and elephants made out of cloth, and bookmarks and jumping jacks. What can I do for you? Asked the clerk. We'd like a little of everything, answered Pippi, looking searchingly around the shelves. We are very short of jumping jacks, for example, she continued, and of cap pistols, but you can remedy that, I hope. Pippi pulled out a fistful of gold pieces, and the children were allowed to pick out whatever they thought they most needed. Annika decided on a wonderful doll with light curly hair and a pink satin dress. It could say Mama when you pressed it on the stomach. Tommy wanted a steam engine, and he got it. All the other children pointed out what they wanted too, and when Pippi finished her shopping, there wasn't very much left in the store, only a few bookmarks and building blocks. Pippi didn't buy a single thing for herself, but Mr. Nilsson got a mirror. And just before they went out, Pippi bought each child a cuckoo whistle. And when the children got out onto the street, they all played on their cuckoo whistles, and Pippi beat time with her false arm. One little boy complained that his cuckoo whistle wouldn't blow. Pippi took the whistle and examined it. Well, no wonder. There's a big wad of gum in front of the hole. Where did you get hold of this treasure? She asked and threw away a big white chunk. As far as I know, I haven't bought any gum. I've had it since Friday, said the boy. And you aren't worried that your windpipe will grow together? I thought that was the usual end to gum chewers. She handed the whistle to the boy, who could now blow as merrily as all the others. There was such a racket on Main Street that at last a policeman came to see what it was all about. What's all this noise? He cried. It's the dress parade march of Kronaberg's regiment, said Pippi. But I am not sure all the kids realize that. Some of them seem to think we are playing Let Your Song Resound Like Thunder. Well, this is a famous Swedish song, which begins, thunder like the thunder, friends. Only in Swedish, the verb for thunder and the noun for thunder are different words. Stop this minute, roared the police officer and held his hands over his ears. Pippi patted his back comfortably with her false arm. Be thankful we didn't buy bassoons, she said. Gradually, the cuckoo whistles were silenced one after another until at last it was only Tommy's whistle, but there was a little peep now and then. The police officer said emphatically that crowds were not allowed to gather on Main Street and all the children must go home. The children really didn't object to this at all. They wanted very much to try their new toy trains and play with their automobiles and put their new dolls to bed. So they all went home happy and contented. None of them ate any supper that night. Pippi and Tommy and Annika all started for home, Pippi drawing the little cart after her. She looked at all the advertisements that went by and spelled them out as well as she could. D-R-U-G-S-T-O-R-E. Isn't that where you buy medicine? Yes. That's where you buy medicine, said Annika. Oh, then I must go right in and buy some, said Pippi. Yes, but you aren't sick, are you? Said Tommy. What one isn't? one may become, said Pippi. There are millions of people who get sick and die just because they don't buy medicine in time, and you are mistaken if you think such a thing is going to happen to me. In the drugstore stood the druggist, filling capsules. She was planning to fill only a few more because it was only closing time. Then Pippi and Tommy and Annika stepped up to the counter. I should like to buy 8 quarts of medicine, said Pippi. What kind of medicine? Asked the druggist impatiently. Preferably some that is good for sickness, said Pippi. What kind of sickness? Said the druggist, still more impatiently. Oh, let's have one that's good for whooping cough and blistered heels and bellyache and a Charlie horse. And if you've happened to push a bean up your nose and a few little things like that. And it would be good if it was possible to polish furniture with it too. It must be really good medicine. The druggist said there was no medicine that was as good as all that. She claimed that different kinds of sicknesses required different kinds of medicine. And when Pippi had mentioned about 10 other troubles that she wanted to cure, she put a whole row of bottles on the counter. On some of them, she wrote for external use only. That meant that the medicine in those bottles should be rubbed on, but not drunk. Pippi paid, took her bottles, thanked her, and left. Tommy and Annika followed her. The druggist looked at the clock and realized that it was closing time. She locked the door carefully and thought how good it would be to go home and have a bite to eat. Pippi put her bottles down outside the door. Oh, I almost forgot the most important thing of all, she said. As the door was now locked, she put her finger on the bell and pushed long and hard. Tommy and Annika could hear clearly how it sounded inside the drugstore. And after a little while, a little window in the door opened. It was the window where you could buy medicine if you happened to be taken ill late in the night. The druggist shook her head out. Her face was quite red. What do you want now? She asked Pippi angrily. Oh, please excuse me, said Pippi. I just happened to think of something. You understand sickness so well. Which is better when you have a stomach ache, to eat a hot pancake or to put your whole stomach in cold water? The druggist's face grew redder still. Get out, she screamed, and be quick about it, or else. She slammed the window. Gee, what a temper, said Pippi. You'd certainly think I'd done something. She rang the bell once more, and in a few seconds the druggist's head appeared in the window again. Her face was dreadfully red now. Pancake is really a little hard to digest, isn't it? Said Pippi, and looked up at her with friendly eyes. The druggist did not answer. Bam! But shut the window again. Pippi shrugged her shoulders. Oh, well, she said, I'll try warm pancakes anyway. She'll only have herself to blame if something goes wrong. Pippi calmly sat down on the steps in front of the drugstore and lined up her bottles. How impractical grown-ups can be, she said. Here I have, let me see, 8 bottles, and everything could perfectly well have gone into this one that's more than half empty anyway. It's lucky I have a little common sense myself. With these words, she pulled the corks out of the bottles and poured all the medicine into one bottle. She shook it vigorously, lifted the bottle to her mouth, and drank 2 good swallows. Annika, who knew that some of the medicine was to be used only to rub on, was a little worried. But Pippi, she said, how do you know that some of that medicine isn't poison? Well, I'll find out, said Pippi happily. I'll find out by tomorrow at the latest. If I'm still alive, then we'll know that it isn't poison and the smallest child can drink it. Tommy and Annika thought this over. And after a while, Tommy said doubtfully in a rather frightened voice, yes, but what if it is poison? Then what? Well, then you can't have what's left in the bottle or polish the dining room furniture with it, said Pippi. Poison or not, this medicine was not bought in vain. She took the bottle and put it in the cart, along with the false arm, Tommy's steam engine and pop gun, Annika's doll, and a bag with 5 little red candies on it. That was all that was left of the 72 pounds. Mr. Nielsen was in the cart, too. He was tired and wanted to ride. For that matter, let me tell you that I think it is very good medicine. I feel much better already. I feel especially healthy and happy in my tail, said Pippi, and she swung her little backside back and forth. Then off she went with the cart, home to Villa Villaquela. Tommy and Annika walked beside her and felt as if they had just a little stomachache.